Welcome back to Gen X Horror. We talk about all things 70s and 80s horror and nostalgia. Today we're celebrating some absolutely fringe horror flicks from the mid to late 80s that you either stumble upon during a desperate rental drought or discover through that one friend who had connections. Meaning he hopefully worked at a video store. These are the films that made you say, what the hell did we just watch? At 2 a.m. And honestly, that's the highest compliment we can give. We've got a title that emptied the shelves of every craft store in New York, and a glorious Bial from Basket Case cameo coming up, and a new favorite of mine featuring a pasty French goth girl that's all moody, sultry, and sad. We're taking a nostalgic ride through the most wonderfully warped films that'll make you question why anyone thought practical effects involving gallons of slime were ever a good idea. Alright gang, let's get into it.
One night you go to bed, and when you wake up, everything is different.
Man, it's like you're browsing through the horror section in 1988 and you see this VHS box with a screaming face and something that looks like a parasitic worm. You rent it purely because the cover promises maximum weirdness. And you know what? Effing delivers. Frank Henenlotter, the madman who gave us Basket Case, serves up the story of Brian, a regular dude who becomes addicted to a parasitic creature named Elmar that looks like a diseased blue phallus and injects euphoric hallucinogenic fluid directly into his brain in exchange for, other brains to eat. Star Rick Hurst was a method actor. He would actually sleep on set in Brian's bedroom to develop a connection to the character's place. The movie plays like a drug addiction allegory if that allegory was written by an insane madman. Complete with Brian stumbling through New York in psychedelic trances while Elmore uses him to murder people left and right. There's a scene in a movie theater that's permanently seared into the collective trauma of every Gen Xer who saw this. On the subway, Brian sees a man carrying a big basket with a lock on it. The character is Dwayne Bradley with Bilal inside the basket from Frank Henenlotter's previous film, Basket Case from 1982. This one was shot on a tiny budget of around $900,000. Henenlotter managed to create practical effects that still hold up today, particularly Elmar himself, who was puppeteered and somehow given more personality than most human actors in 80s horror. The whole thing plays like Cronenberg's body horror crashed into a after-school special about saying no to drugs, except the drugs are a singing parasite and the lesson is extremely unclear. And that's exactly why we love stumbling upon weird movies like this at 1 a.m. during sleepovers. Remember renting a movie based purely on the title and possibly the cover art, getting home, popping it in, and realizing you'd stumble onto something way more artistic and disturbing than you bargained for? That was The Living Dead Girl, French director Jean Rollins' bizarre mashup of zombie horror and tragic romance that absolutely did not prepare you for what you were about to witness. The plot follows Catherine, a young woman who's resurrected when toxic waste gets dumped near her tomb, and that's very 1980s, and she emerges with an insatiable hunger for human blood. And it's sexy as hell. She reconnects with her childhood friend, Helene, and what unfolds is this weirdly poetic, deeply uncomfortable story about obsessive love, death, and the lengths people will go to hold on to the past. All wrapped in that distinctly European art horror aesthetic that made American kids go, wait, horror movies can look like this? Roland originally sought Italian actress Teresa Ann Savoy for the title role, but when she met him, Savoy said she would never work with Roland under any circumstances, and instead Blanchett was cast. She found the shooting to be physically exhausting and collapsed on set. Blanchett's performance in the ending scene with Catherine, no spoilers, was apparently so believable that the crew were worried for her mental state. Roland, who made a career out of blending gothic atmosphere and exploitation elements, shot this on a tiny budget, but managed to create something that felt both trashy and genuinely artistic, which confused the hell out of critics at the time. They didn't know whether to praise it or to condemn it. There was an English version filmed with the same cast and crew, which was directed by Gregory Heller, who would shoot his scene right after Jean Rollins. The English version has never been released and is now a lost film. I would give anything to see that. The Living Dead Girl became a cult favorite on the tape trading circuit precisely because it occupied that weird space between serious horror cinema and pure grindhouse sleaze. It's got brutal violence and genuine pathos, often in the same scene, which is a balancing act most films couldn't pull off. Reminds me a lot of Giallo.
You must be the new tenant.
Yes! No. I'm Alex Carmichael, your new neighbor. This is just my friend.
Gee, thanks for the swell intro, Al.
This title is incredibly fun. Man, if you managed to find this ultra low budget New York City body horror oddity on VHS, you were either extremely dedicated to weird horror or you had a video store clerk who genuinely understood what he was doing. And if you thought New York City in the late 80s couldn't get any grosser, Greg Lamberson's Slime City is here to prove you wrong with a story about toxic yogurt, demonic possession, and more practical goop effects than your stomach can likely handle. Alex moves into a sketchy New York apartment and gets invited to his neighbor's place where they serve him some seriously questionable homemade Himalayan yogurt and wine. Those don't go together to me, which, surprise, turns him into a slime-covered murderous monster who has to kill people to maintain his human form. And if you see him covered in slime, it's totally worth killing people over. This is pure shot on 16mm guerrilla filmmaking at its finest. Made for around 50 grand over 2 full years of just weekend shoots with friends and film students providing most of the crew, and also filmed in actual grimy New York locations that required no set dressing because the city in the 80s already looked super post-apocalyptic. Lamberson created this thing as a love letter to Henenlotter's Basket Case and Frankenhooker, leaning hard into practical effects that are simultaneously disgusting and impressive. There's a transformation scene that involves gallons of colored slime that looks like someone raided every craft store in Manhattan, man. Critics who actually saw it, which were unfortunately not many, either loved its DIY punk rock energy or dismissed it as amateur gross out trash. But for VHS collectors, Slime City, man, it became essential viewing, precisely because it captured that raw, anything-goes spirit of independent 80s horror before everything got sanitized and corporate and all that crap. Bill Gibran of DVD Talk criticized Slime City for its quote-unquote failure to create a believable atmosphere of dread, and wrote, "There are not many laughs, but there are quite a few groans in this oddly moody mess." He referred to it as a kind of cult favorite, a distinction he felt is owed to the film's lack of availability and splatter elements, and wrote of the latter, "It's not at the level of a trauma title or something as essential as Evil Dead or The Thing, but what we get here is still handled well and a nice combination of nastiness and invention." And you know what? To him I say, hell yeah.
To sleep, perchance to dream. But she could never sleep. She was afraid to sleep.
1988's Dream Demon. This is the British psychological horror film that was the thinking person's Nightmare on Elm Street. If you were the kind of kid who wanted your dream-based horror with a healthy side of repressed trauma and Thatcher-era anxiety, which was likely no one, I have to assume, in 1988. Diana, a young bride-to-be, starts experiencing horrific nightmares that begin bleeding into reality just days before her wedding to a Falklands war hero, and soon she can't tell what's real anymore as dream demons, hence the title, which gets points for insane accuracy, manifest to terrorize her while tabloid journalists literally camp outside her house. Now, director Harley Cokless creates this oppressive atmosphere where the dream sequences feel genuinely unsettling rather than crazy flashy. There's minimal gore, but maximum dread, with Diana stumbling through nightmarish scenarios involving her fiancé's war trauma, mysterious childhood memories, and some seriously disgusting imagery involving a burned little girl that still hits different than most 80s scare tactics. This one was made for around $1.5 million or pounds or whatever. The film struggled to find distribution and basically vanished after its theatrical run, making it this elusive oddity that horror nerds spent years tracking down through gray market tape traders before any proper home video release. It's said that there's a very obvious reuse of Hellraiser sets for a dream sequence about 57 minutes into the movie. While I didn't make the comparison and am no Hellraiser file, I believe it was the wood-cladded corridor she runs through right here. Correct me, gang, but that looks familiar to me. The Guardian criticized the film for failing to quote-unquote follow its own logic, but conceded that the film is often smartly made and the special effects are excellent. The pity is that it could have been so much better had it stuck to what it was really about, which is people haunting themselves. The Sydney Morning Herald wrote, "The special effects won't rock your socks, but the buildup of suspense and some sudden shocks are guaranteed to hold attention." Dream Demon proved that British horror in the late 80s was willing to go cerebral and psychological when American horror was doubling down on wisecracking slasher sequels, and finding this tape felt like discovering proof that not every horror movie needed a hockey mask and a body count to get under your skin.
It started as a day out, a trip that held the promise of fun and pleasure. But for Rick and his friends, the fun ended early.
You know a movie's going to be absolutely bonkers when the premise is teens get stranded on an island with a haunted hotel that's trapped in a perpetual New Year's Eve celebration from 1959, and then really starts falling apart around them. The movie was originally supposed to be set completely in the 1950s, but the idea was abandoned due to the budget. This is 1987's Bloody New Year. Director Norman J. Warren, who previously gave us the equally demented Inseminoid, we covered that a video or so ago, delivers this bizarre British horror mashup where a group of young people seeking shelter from a storm stumbled into the Grand Island Hotel, which seems normal at first, except for the 1959 decorations, the fact it's completely deserted, and oh yeah, the building itself is apparently alive and trying to kill them through crazy surreal means. Director Jay Warren is rumored to have hated making this movie due to restrictions from the producers, and he claimed that they didn't know how horror movies worked. Due to his experience, he never directed a movie again, but did make 3 short films stretch across the next 20 years. Ouch. On the second day of dubbing, I must confess, I gave up on the film. I'd run out of fight and just sat there and let them go through the motions. That's rough to hear from the director. Either way, the film throws everything at the wall. There's a killer fishing net, a demonic magician film projection that comes to life, homicidal curtains, an evil snowman, and a climax involving time loop and dimensional rifts that the movie barely bothers to explain because honestly, why start making sense now? Shot at the real-life Norney Carnage Hotel in Surrey, Warren worked with a modest budget but compensated with genuinely creative kills and this pervasive atmosphere of wrongness. Like someone made a slasher film but forgot to include an actual slasher and just let the location do all the murdering. Kim Newman describes the film as a feeble dump bin video quickie. Dennis Schwartz, in his review for Oz's World Movie Reviews, calls it a goofy film with brutal dialogue, cheesy direction, and not much plot. Man, screw you, Dennis. Bloody New Year is the kind of movie that makes you wonder if the script was written by throwing darts at a board labeled scary things and then filming whatever combination came up. And yet it's got this weird dreamlike quality that sticks with you. Probably because your brain is still trying to process what the hell that fishing net scene was actually about. Man, whether it was Brain Damage's parasitic drug take, the Living Dead Girl's gothic blood beauty, Slime City's gooey body horror, Dream Demon's psychological creep, or Bloody New Year's reality-bending chaos, these films showed us that the best horror came from the edges of the genre, not the mainstream. As always, everyone is always looking for what you were not only traumatized by, but the deepest cuts you always love to share. Drop some titles in the comments for everyone to check out. I can't wait to see what we all get turned on to. Man, thanks for watching, everyone. I truly love doing this, and I love you guys. As always, stay cool.